Friends, if you are curious about the highly talked about movie Sinners in 2025 and want to know everything about it, then you have come to the perfect place. If you are visiting our channel for the very first time, make sure you subscribe right now so you don't miss out on more exciting updates about the latest and most awaited films. In today's video, we will dive deep into every detail about Sinners in 2025. We will explore what this movie is all about, its unique concept, and why it has been creating so much buzz among movie lovers. I will share with you where exactly you can watch this movie, which OTT platform is going to feature it, or if it will be available on any satellite channels. You will also get to know the interesting behind-the-scenes details including its pre-production process, the planning that went into it, the filming locations, the post-production phase, and all the efforts that brought this project to life. We will also talk about the budget of this film and how much it managed to collect at the box office or is expected to collect based on its early reception. That's not all, because in this video, I will also take you through the fascinating storyline of the movie, discussing the plot without spoiling the experience for those who haven't watched it yet. I will give you a small yet impactful review of what the story feels like, how engaging it is, and what makes it different from the rest. We will discuss each key fact about this film, explore the roles played by the star cast, talk about the performances of the actors, and how each character contributes to the film's thrilling narrative. You will get to know who has played which character and how their performance has shaped the overall feel of the movie. Apart from the story and performances, we will also highlight the technical department, how the visuals look, the kind of cinematography it offers, the music department and its contribution to the atmosphere of the movie, the editing style, and even the background score that gives life to every intense scene. We will see how the director has approached this project and whether the production has lived up to the expectations set by its teasers and trailers. This video will leave no stone unturned as we talk about every detail that movie lovers like you want to know before watching a film like Sinners in 2025. So friends, I request you to stay with me till the end because this video is filled with all the exciting and detailed information you need, whether you are planning to watch this movie or simply want to know what makes it stand out. Let's begin the video and explore the world of Sinners in 2025 together. From the moment Sinners in 2025 opens, it doesn't feel like a story that's going to hand you neat answers. It throws you into the middle of a rumor, a viral clip, and a town that already thinks it knows the truth, and then peels that certainty away layer by layer. We meet an ensemble whose lives are threaded together by one late-night incident. Maya, a journalist with a shaky moral compass. Jonah, a former pastor trying to live quietly after a shame he won't name. Lila, a politician's aide who keeps secrets in the notes app of her phone. And Elias, the town's unofficial archivist who watches everything and judges little. On paper the plot is simple. A scandal detonates, people take sides, the fallout spreads, but the film delights in misdirection, choosing a fractured, time-slipping structure that mirrors the fractured truths of its characters. Scenes loop back on themselves with fresh information, flashbacks arrive as half-remembered confessions, and social media posts, audio clips, and found footage get intercut with present-day confrontations so you never trust a single viewpoint for long. The inciting incident, the clip that starts the fire, is almost a red herring. The film uses it to reveal how fast a community constructs villains, then slowly shows the real damage is in the ways people protect themselves by sacrificing others. Key turning points are staged less as plot conveniences and more as moral cross-examinations. Maya's decision to publish something she knows is incomplete, Jonah's collapse in the middle of a sermon that forces him to confront what he ran from, Lila's quiet act of betrayal when she chooses career preservation over a friend's safety, and Elias's reveal that he has been collecting everyone's sins like evidence for a future reckoning. Each turning point reframes the previous scenes, so the midpoint isn't a single bombshell but a slow unspooling where loyalty becomes liability, and the lines between perpetrator and victim blur. Conflict in the film is almost always doubled: external, public outrage, legal threats, physical confrontations, and internal, shame, self-justification, the desperate calculus of who you can afford to forgive. The narrative delights in putting characters on the horns of moral dilemmas. Confess and lose everything, or lie and keep your life intact, expose the truth and endanger innocence, or protect someone and become complicit. That moral pressure cooker produces the film's biggest emotional hits, a scene where two characters argue in a car and the camera never cuts away from their faces, revealing shame as something physical and painfully quiet, a montage where old home videos play against present-day courtroom clips to show memory altering itself to fit the story we need to tell, and a late sequence where the town gathers and the architecture itself, the church spire, the square, the shuttered factory, becomes a chorus commenting on the collective guilt the characters carry. Thematically, the film loves paradox. Redemption is offered and rejected. Confession can free and entrap, public accountability looks noble until it becomes a spectacle. The screenplay uses motifs: mirrors that show faces we don't recognize, clocks that keep stopping, recurring religious imagery that's both comforting and suffocating, to stitch the emotional through line together even as the timeline hops around. Stylistically, the non-linear editing and interleaved perspectives aren't just gimmicks. They force the audience into the same unpleasant job as the characters, piecing together a life from fragments and deciding whether to forgive based on fragments alone. The film's climax avoids a tidy moral verdict. Instead, it stages a confrontation that's as much about who will take responsibility as it is about who will be forgiven, and that confrontation is filmed in close, claustrophobic shots so the world feels smaller and the stakes feel personal. After the climax, the denouement resists pat closure. Some characters rebuild in messy, tentative ways, others are left to live with the consequences of their choices, and the film leaves a few threads deliberately unresolved, because its central question is less, who did what, and more, what are we willing to do to preserve how we see ourselves? The narrative's strength is emotional honesty. It doesn't pretend sins are exotic. They are ordinary compromises, and the storytelling honors that by letting small moments, a lie told to spare a child, a touch that meant more than it should have, carry as much weight as the headline-making scandals. The tonal shifts, wry observations, sudden brutality, quiet melancholy, are balanced so the film never becomes flatly moralizing. Instead, it keeps you complicit, asking you to sit with discomfort. By the time the credits loom, the structure that once felt disorienting clicks into place. The non-linearity taught you to withhold judgment, the shifting perspectives taught you empathy for contradictory impulses, and the repeated motifs reminded you that stories about sin are often stories about survival. The result is a ride that's narratively clever, morally messy, and emotionally stubborn. It refuses to tell you who the real sinner is, and in doing so it forces you to look closer at the mirror it holds up to every character, and perhaps to yourself. From the moment the film introduces its core players, character work in Sinners in 2025 feels less like filling archetypal slots and more like letting people earn their complexity scene by scene. These are characters who carry contradictions in their pockets and reveal them in private, awkward moments rather than headline gestures. Maya, the journalist, is the engine of the story's moral friction. At first she reads like a career-first type who treats scoops as currency, but the script keeps slipping micro-choices into her day that complicate that label. A hand that lingers on a voicemail she shouldn't listen to, a late-night edit where she deletes a sentence and then brings it back, a scene where she repeats a sympathetic lie to a grieving mother and then immediately vomits it away in the bathroom. Those small, messy moments make her arc feel earned. She doesn't undergo a single epiphany so much as a series of tiny betrayals and tiny acts of courage that accumulate until she must decide whether to weaponize truth or protect it. Jonah, the former pastor, is written with an honesty most films avoid. His past shame isn't a dramatic reveal so much as a living weather pattern that tints his behavior. Nervous rituals, a habit of turning sermons into confessions, a trembling in his hands whenever a congregation chants the word forgiveness. His growth is not tidy redemption. Instead, we watch him move from avoidance to accountability in stuttering steps. He tries to bury himself in service, then snaps and sits alone at a diner, finally choosing a humiliating public admission that strips him of sanctuary and forces him to reckon with faith outside the pulpit. Lila, the politician's aide, is deliciously three-dimensional because she's both strategist and soft spot. She drafts talking points with the same practiced calm she uses to comfort a friend at 2 in the morning. Her arc interrogates ambition and intimacy. When she opts for career preservation over whistleblowing, it reads less like cowardice and more like a pragmatic calculus about who will feed her aging father next month. That moral calculation makes her betrayals painful because you understand their logistics even as you despise their consequences. Elias, the town archivist, is the quietly theatrical heart of the ensemble. At first he is the voyeur who collects other people's sins like stamps, cataloging evidence in a room that smells of dust and old guilt, but over time he becomes the person who realizes that knowledge without action is cruelty. His shift from passive historian to someone who leaks, not out of malice but out of a kind of stern love for truth, is an unsettling reminder that heroism in this story is often indistinguishable from sabotage. Peripheral figures, an ex-lover who refuses reconciliation, a teenager who learns activism the hard way, a pastor's wife who keeps a private ledger of small kindnesses, aren't decorative. They function as pressure points that reveal the protagonist's hidden fractures. Relationships in this film do the heavy lifting. Alliances form and dissolve not because of plot demands but because characters reveal needs that conflict. Maya and Jonah's uneasy symbiosis is one of the film's best engines, a push-pull of professional opportunism and religious contrition where each inadvertently catalyzes the other's worst and best impulses. Lila's private intimacy with a minor character reframes a later public betrayal, turning a political decision into a human wound. Even the quietest interactions, a hand on a shoulder left too long, a deleted text message that surfaces as a printed receipt in court, are written to carry narrative weight, so that who the characters are becomes the story's primary unfolding. Motivations are never simplified into single words like ambition or vengeance. They are layered. Fear of ruin, genuine desire to repair damage, hunger for obscured truth, protection of memory, and sometimes petty human vanity. The film resists tidy arcs in favor of partial transformations. Some characters learn to live with their flaws rather than magically outgrow them, which feels truer and more interesting. Performance choices underline that complexity. Actors play many beats with micro-expressions instead of speeches, allowing a shrug or a pause to map an interior debate more convincingly than an expository monologue ever could. The screenplay uses recurring visual motifs, mirrors, half-read letters, worn hymnals, not as shorthand but as emotional echolocation. When a character confronts their reflection, the camera lingers long enough to show whether they flinch, smile, or lie. Moments of growth are often quiet and embarrassingly human. Jonah's admission comes not in an oration but in a voicemail he never meant to send. Maya's conscience flips in the second she watches a child become collateral in a story she is about to publish. Lila's reckoning arrives when she sees herself through a column she helped bury. These are pivot points that feel inevitable after the fact because the film has been setting them up through character detail from the first frame. Importantly, the film lets failure be part of growth. Characters make choices that hurt others even as those choices expose their own vulnerabilities, and the narrative often punishes but also understands those failures. That moral ambiguity is what gives the story its emotional teeth. Relationships change direction, loyalties are recalibrated, and the plot moves forward because people respond to one another in honest, messy ways rather than according to plot convenience. In short, character development in Sinners in 2025 is less about clean transformations and more about lived, sometimes unsatisfying humanity. The movie trusts its characters to be interesting in themselves, and because it does, the small domestic moments end up feeling as pivotal as the public scandals, and every choice reverberates with personal cost. What truly makes Sinners in 2025 resonate beyond its intricate narrative is how the cast inhabits their roles with a kind of lived-in authenticity that rarely feels rehearsed. Each performance seems less like acting and more like the gradual revealing of private lives, caught in moments they didn't expect anyone to witness. The standout here is undoubtedly the actress playing Maya. She doesn't approach her character as a conventional lead but as a bundle of conflicting impulses: ambition, guilt, and a fragile hunger for redemption. Watch her in the early newsroom sequences, where she delivers lines with crisp authority, only for her eyes to betray a flicker of hesitation each time her editor praises her. It's a performance stitched together with microshifts: the pause before sending an email, the trembling hand over a recorder, the way her voice hardens when she knows she's lying to herself. That layered restraint makes her eventual unraveling feel earned rather than performed. Jonah, brought to life by an actor better known for stoic roles, surprises with vulnerability. His sermons are intentionally uneven, his voice cracks, his posture stiffens at certain words, and in one unforgettable scene where he confronts a congregant, his anger isn't theatrical. It's the kind that makes a room quieter rather than louder. This actor lets shame sit in his body, turning simple gestures like folding his hands or adjusting his collar into tiny admissions of defeat. Lila's portrayal is another quiet triumph. The actress never raises her voice to dominate a scene. She controls it by underplaying, letting her gaze carry both calculation and care. There is a late-night kitchen scene where she comforts a friend with the same mouth that later delivers a ruthless press briefing. The duality is played with such poise that it feels less like hypocrisy and more like survival. Elias, the archivist, has one of the more enigmatic performances, and the actor leans into that with a dry, almost theatrical cadence in the first act, which gradually erodes into a more human, halting delivery as his secrets bleed out. By the time he confronts the others, his earlier affectations make his rawness sting even more. The supporting cast, often sidelined in films like this, carries surprising weight. A grieving mother played by a veteran character actress owns her single courtroom scene with a silence that stretches for what feels like an eternity before she finally speaks, and that delay says more than any dialogue could. A teenage activist, portrayed by a newcomer, injects a jittery, restless energy into his scenes. His impassioned monologue on the courthouse steps feels unpolished in exactly the right way, the kind of rawness that comes from someone still forming their worldview in real time. Even bit players, a weary bartender, a gossip-hungry podcaster, a quietly furious spouse, feel like they've lived entire lives outside the frame, and that credit goes to both the casting and the actor's instinct to underplay rather than chase spotlight. Chemistry between the leads is another highlight. Maya and Jonah share an uneasy magnetism where silences bristle, and their shared screen time crackles with a tension that's half alliance, half mutual exposure. Lila's interactions with both feel like a third gravitational pull, warping their decisions even when she's not in the room. What elevates these performances is their refusal to offer easy reads. The actors don't signpost their characters' morality, they let it flicker, contradict, and evolve. This makes even mundane exchanges, a shared cigarette outside a courthouse, a voicemail left unsent, a side-eye during a town hall meeting, carry a disproportionate emotional charge. The director's choice to linger on faces rather than cut away quickly gives the performers space to breathe, and they use it. You can often see 3 or 4 emotions fight for dominance in a single close-up. The cumulative effect is a cast that doesn't just deliver lines but embodies a world where truth is slippery, shame is contagious, and survival is an art form. Each actor, whether in 2 scenes or 20, contributes a thread to that tapestry, making Sinners in 2025 less about individual showpieces and more about the unsettling harmony of flawed, vividly drawn people colliding under pressure. From the very first frame, the director announces a vocabulary for the film, not by telling you what to feel, but by choosing how the camera will let you feel it. Sinners in 2025 wears its tone like a wardrobe change, sometimes threadbare and intimate, sometimes sharply formal and public. Those switches aren't accidental, they're carefully steered by directorial decisions that make the movie feel less like a sequence of events and more like a world you're invited, and sometimes pushed, into. The director treats mood like a terrain to move through. Quiet, claustrophobic interiors where guilt feels physical, wide, empty exteriors where the town's silence roars, and sudden public spaces that turn private grief into a spectacle. That sense of controlled tonal variety is one of the film's strongest signatures. Structurally, the director delights in playing puppet master with time and perspective. Non-linearity isn't used simply to look clever, it's staged so the editing becomes an act of interrogation. Scenes loop back on themselves not as repetition but as recalibration. A moment is replayed with a different camera angle, or a flashback is inserted where silence previously reigned, and each edit reframes what you thought you knew. This editorial boldness asks the audience to become investigators alongside the characters. You watch, you hold a hypothesis, and then the director, with a sly cut or a revealing close-up, ruptures that hypothesis. The rhythm of these revelations is sculpted to keep empathy precarious. You are never allowed to settle comfortably into judgment. Visually, the film favors a language of close observation. The director often lets the camera breathe on faces, granting actors the time to let tiny expressions do narrative work. Close-ups are not spectacles but listening devices. The camera lingers on a hand, a cracked smile, a tear about to fall, and in that small geography an entire motive is exposed. Then, in contrast, there are moments of architectural cinema. The town square, the church spire, the shuttered factory. Frames where humans are small and the environment reads like a chorus. Composition frequently uses off-center framing and negative space to communicate moral imbalance. Subjects are pushed towards the frame edge when they're compromised, centered when they attempt moral clarity. Depth of field becomes psychological. Shallow focus isolates memory and shame, wide focus forces you to witness communal consequences. Pacing is another deliberate tool in the director's kit. The film moves like a tide, languid and meticulous in its exposition, then abrupt and choppy when consequences kick in. Long takes let conversations simmer and expose uncomfortable silences. Quick cuts accelerate panic and public spectacle. Montage sequences, old home videos versus courthouse footage, for example, are used to compress how memory and public narrative diverge. Where a single unbroken shot emphasizes personal humiliation, a rapid montage emphasizes how quickly a story becomes media. The director is comfortable letting scenes breathe when they need to, and snipping mercilessly when spectacle demands velocity, which keeps the audience constantly recalibrating emotionally. Sound and silence are as authorial as camera placement. The director uses diegetic sound, a hymn sung half-heartedly, the hum of fluorescent lights, a recorder's static, to ground scenes in texture, and then allows the score to intrude like a memory at unexpected points. Music often arrives not to signal emotion but to complicate it. A melancholic motif undercuts an act of public righteous fury, suggesting that moral clarity is never wholly neat. Silence is used as punctuation. A courtroom pause or the hush after an accusation is treated like a heavy object in the frame, and the camera listens as much as it watches. That interplay between ambient noise, diegetic audio clips, and the score gives the film a tactile auditory identity. Directing actors in this film feels collaborative rather than prescriptive. The director's preference for micro-behavior, a dropped gaze, a breath held too long, encourages performances that trust subtlety over declamation. Blocking is often naturalistic. People don't stand at perfect angles waiting for exposition. They shuffle, move around furniture, hide behind props, and those choices let performances remain human and awkward. The director also creates space for chemistry to emerge organically, arranging scenes so that silence and reaction shots become as important as scripted lines. That patience from the director is why an unsent voicemail or a glance across a car can feel like a central plot beat. Stylistically, there are recurring visual motifs that the director returns to, not as cute signatures but as thematic anchors: mirrors that fracture identity, clocks that stall or speed up to register disorientation, religious iconography that can comfort and suffocate in the same frame. Color grading is used economically. Memory and intimacy get a warmer, slightly sun-faded palette, while public sequences and media-driven moments are rendered in harsher, colder tones. Production design supports this tonal split. A lived-in kitchen with chipped paint feels different from the antiseptic glare of a press room, and the director stages those contrasts to show how different spaces demand different moral performances. The director also leans into contemporary narrative devices without letting them feel gimmicky. Social media inserts, found footage, and anonymous audio clips are integrated into the film's grammar so they function as evidence, temptation, and poison all at once. The camera doesn't treat a viral clip as mere exposition. The director frames it as an event that reshapes reality for the town. That choice makes modern information flows a character in their own right, unpredictable, rumor-driven, and morally volatile. Finally, the director's risk-taking is obvious and deliberate. They often resist the cinematic comforts of tidy catharsis and melodramatic reveal, instead staging confrontations that expose the awkward, small, morally ambiguous choices that humans actually make. This isn't about withholding answers for shock value, it's about trusting that the audience can live with complexity. The result is a film that feels both composed and unsettled, where every stylistic move, shot, cut, pause, sonic choice, is asking you to pay attention not just to what the characters did, but to how stories about them are made and remade in public. Cinematography in Sinners in 2025 works like a lie detector test that the story keeps failing on purpose, using camera placement, light, and framing to show how truth slips between what people say and what the lens insists on seeing. Interiors are often lit with practicals that don't flatter anyone. Fluorescent hum in the courthouse, jaundiced sodium vapor glow in the parking lot, warm kitchen bulbs that make guilt look almost domestic, while public scenes lean colder and harder, so the image itself draws a line between private remorse and public performance. The camera favors close, observational lenses for confession-sized moments, letting shallow depth of field tunnel our attention to a twitching jaw or a blinking eye, and then switches to wider, slightly distorted frames when the town becomes a chorus, putting small figures under big architecture so you feel how institutions dwarf individual pain. Framing choices double as character psychology, off-center compositions whenever someone is compromised, symmetrical dead-center shots when they attempt moral clarity, mirrors and glass used as frames within frames to catch competing versions of the same person in a single image. One of the most striking sequences stages a car argument with the lens pressed uncomfortably close against the window, reflections of streetlights smearing across faces so you're never sure if you're watching tears or traffic, and the take refuses to cut away, letting silence and shallow focus weaponize the space between two people. Elsewhere, a church scene plays with silhouette, bodies reduced to outlines against a pale morning nave while dust motes drift like visual static, the camera creeping forward in a slow push that makes a whispered apology feel like a cliff edge. Found footage inserts are graded differently. Harsher contrast, clipped highlights, skittish handheld cadence, so that when the film intercuts them with composed, tripod still shots, the aesthetic clash becomes a moral argument about what counts as proof. A recurring visual motif uses clock faces and cracked mirrors in rack focus transitions, foregrounding the object before the character snaps into focus behind it, a subtle reminder that time and reflection are always interposing themselves between intent and action. Movement is purposeful rather than showy, dollies that nudge closer during hedged answers, handheld sway that blooms when tempers spike, a rare overhead drift during a town hall crescendo that momentarily turns people into map pins on a moral battlefield. Color temperature tracks the narrative's shifting loyalties, with memory tinted gently towards sun-faded warmth and present-day spectacle cooled to steel, and when the film wants ambiguity it mixes sources, warm table lamp against an icy street lamp, so faces split into two palettes that argue with each other. Negative space is used like a pressure gauge, empty corners and long hallways swallowing characters who are running out of lies, while tight doorframe compositions create literal choke points where decisions have to be made. Even insert shots carry tension, a recorder's red light blinking in extreme close-up, a trembling thumb hovering over send, a printed receipt curling at the edges under a desk lamp, each photographed with macro precision so small objects feel like detonators. In the courtroom, the cinematographer goes deep focus and wider stop, letting every spectator's reaction stay legible in the background, which turns testimony into a communal event where judgment leaks from the benches, and then later, during a private reckoning, the image flattens into shallow focus again, isolating a single face in a sea of blur as if empathy itself has narrowed to a point. Rain is not used for melodrama but for texture, a misting drizzle that beads on glass and turns streetlights into soft halos during a late reveal, and the camera stays outside the window so the scene plays in layered planes. Weather, glass, reflection, actor, compressing secrecy into a single frame. Throughout, light is motivated but expressive, with practicals placed to carve cheekbones into topography during lies and to soften edges during moments of grace, while the grade keeps skin tones honest and backgrounds slightly desaturated so color pops only when the story needs emphasis. Red tape folders, a blue campaign banner, the yellowed page of an old hymnal. The net effect is a visual language that creates atmosphere without shouting, builds tension by deciding what the audience is allowed to see and when, and finds beauty not in postcard vistas but in the tiny, treacherous details where characters give themselves away. From the first cut onwards, the editing in Sinners in 2025 behaves like a second narrator, not neutral, but opinionated, nudging you toward certain sympathies and then mischievously pulling the rug out from under them, and that authorial presence is what gives the film its shape and bite. Transitions are rarely invisible flourishes, instead they're deliberate transactions. An L-cut will let the sound of an earlier scene linger over a new image, so a memory keeps chasing a character into the next moment, while a J-cut will drag you forward on someone's voice before you see their face, creating a small delay that builds curiosity and often anxiety. The film's nonlinearity is edited with an investigator's patience. The editor will replay a scene from a slightly shifted angle or with a different insert to reframe your understanding, and those replays don't feel redundant because each pass brings new audio or a tiny visual detail that changes the tone, a sideways glance that wasn't obvious before, a muffled scream that suddenly becomes audible. Cross-cutting is used not just to create parallel action but moral contrast. While the town hall swells into righteous outrage, the cutaways to a private kitchen conversely puncture the spectacle with domestic quiet, and the rhythm of those alternations teaches you to hear the public and private as competing drumbeats. Long takes are earned rather than indulgent. When the camera holds on a conversation, the edit resists the urge to cut for clarity and lets awkwardness accumulate, which makes the eventual cut feel like a small mercy or a necessary violence. Conversely, the editing will sometimes adopt a staccato montage, old home videos, social clips, and courtroom footage stitched together with a speed that mimics the virality that propels the plot, and those montages compress narrative time while piling up emotional context in a way single scenes cannot. Found footage inserts and social media clips are graded and framed differently and are often edited into acts like evidence slotted into a file. They arrive abrupt, grainy, and with jumpier cuts, so their rupture of the main visual texture feels like a small betrayal, which is precisely the point. The editor plays with silence as much as with motion. A cut to reaction after a held silence can feel louder than any score, and the film uses these voids strategically, letting penalties reverberate off emptier frames so the audience has to inhabit the consequences. There are also clever micro-edit moves that function like emotional punctuation, cutaways to an object, a recorder's red light, a hymn book, a half-drunk cup of coffee, that become associative anchors for the viewer, returning later with different implications, and match cuts that connect two moments across time by joining similar silhouettes or gestures, which gives the non-linearity an elegiac internal logic rather than feeling anarchic. Rhythm ally: the film is a tide, patient and deliberate in exposition, accelerating as scandals compound, then deliberately decelerating to let characters reckon. This push and pull keeps engagement high because the audience never quite knows whether the next scene will be an intimate close-up that asks for empathy or a quick montage that demands judgment. That said, there are moments where the pacing's ambitions show. A scene or two in the middle act lingers so long on procedural detail that the storytelling momentum softens, and elsewhere a rapid-fire sequence of media inserts can feel breathless to the point of blurring emotional nuance. Those are not failures so much as stylistic choices that ask viewers to shift gears quickly, and reactions will vary depending on how much patience someone has for slow-burn moral excavation. Importantly, editing here is ethical as well as aesthetic. It withholds and reveals in ways that shape our complicity. When a revelation arrives, it's often because the cut has been withheld until a character's expression makes that cut feel inevitable, so the editor isn't just moving images, they're adjudicating when truth lands. Sound bridges and audio overlaps are used to stitch scenes emotionally. A voicemail left in one scene will thread into the ambient noise of the next, so the past literally bleeds into the present. The film also uses temporal ellipses generously. Entire days are skipped with a single insert, which both tightens the runtime and forces the viewer to fill in moral logic, turning passive viewing into active assembly. Visually, quick reaction cuts to background characters in key public scenes expand the moral field. The edit refuses to let the story remain centered on only 2 or 3 protagonists and insists we witness collateral damage, and that multiplies the emotional stakes without bloating the plot. In short, the editing often behaves like a small, insistent brain that decides when you should feel claustrophobic, outraged, or quietly sorrowful, and while that control sometimes overplays its hand in moments of excessive lingering or frantic montage, the overall pattern is of an editor who treats rhythm as argument, transitions as commentary, and silence as one of the film's most persuasive moves. The soundtrack and score in Sinners in 2025 behave less like background decoration and more like a secret co-author of the script. They pull at your mood, interrupt your assumptions, and sometimes lie to you on purpose so the reveal lands harder. From the opening bars a sparse, 2-note motif creeps in, think isolated piano doubled with a low, uneasy cello, that the composer reshapes throughout the film to mean different things: curiosity, guilt, the moment before a choice, and that single musical cell becomes a breadcrumb trail you start following without realizing it. There's a clever use of leitmotifs. Maya's theme is fragile and rhythmically unsettled, interrupted piano figures and a distant electronic flutter that mimics the jitter of a newsroom phone, while Jonah's musical signature borrows from sacred sonorities, an organish pad and a half remembered him. But the harmony is slightly off, so what sounds like comfort carries the weight of unease. Lila's cues are minimal, often percussive and economical, underscoring calculation rather than melodrama. And Elias gets textures of tape hiss, cracked playback and archival samples so his scenes sound like someone dusting off memory. Diegetic music is used as a scoring tool. A hymn sung in the church becomes the film's counterpoint when the mix bleeds it into non-diegetic underscore, turning communal faith into a private commentary. Radio jingles and social media clips are given a harsher, glitchy tonal palette, clipped synths, distorted vocal stabs, so modern information flows feel musically like intruders. Silence is treated as an instrument with surgical precision. The score will drop away entirely during an intense close-up so ambient sounds, a breath, a recorder's red light, the scrape of a chair, become the percussion, and when a motif returns after that silence it reads like an accusation. The composer and sound designer also collaborate in mischievous ways. Foley elements are sometimes pitched, looped, and woven into rhythmic beds. A trembling thumb turns into a percussive loop, a voicemail beat becomes a metronome, so the boundary between sound design and music blurs, which suits a film obsessed with evidence and replay. There are standout compositions that the film leans on, an early elegiac string passage that surfaces in several private reckoning scenes and deepens each time it's heard, and a courtroom crescendo that substitutes brass-like pressure with layered choir-like textures and industrial percussion, giving public spectacle a mechanical, almost punitive pulse. The score is economical rather than indulgent. It rarely swells to manipulate you, choosing restraint except when the narrative demands an emphatic musical shove. Those moments feel deliberate and even a little shocking because they break the film's usual composure. Motifs are used to mislead as well as reveal. A warm-sounding phrase in a memory montage will later be reharmonized into something colder during a public montage, so your emotional allegiance is subtly shifted from nostalgia to suspicion. On the technical side, the mix respects dialogue and ambient clarity. Music sits in pockets that enhance rather than drown conversation, and the transitions between scoring styles, acoustic, electronic, found audio, are edited to mirror the film's jump cuts. Audio J and L cuts create psychological overlaps where the music from a later memory can eerily precede the image, making past and present feel braided. In sequences of montage and virality, the score adopts looped, sample-based patterns that mimic social media's repetition, turning musical repetition into a commentary on rumor's contagiousness. There's also a humanizing set of small cues, a single hesitant piano figure when a character almost confesses, a soft harmonic cluster when a child appears in frame, that make emotional micro-moments register without grandstanding. Finally, the film uses unresolved harmony as a narrative tool. Many of the cues end on suspended chords or open fifths that refuse tidy resolution, which leave scenes feeling morally unfinished in precisely the way the story intends. The music complicates sympathy, amplifies tension, and, when it chooses silence instead, forces the audience to supply the note that's been deliberately withheld. Sinners in 2025 is less interested in delivering tidy moral lessons than in setting up a moral mirror and watching what happens when a whole town, and by extension we, the viewers, can't agree on whose reflection to believe, and that disagreement is the film's primary playground for theme. At the center is a persistent question. What counts as truth when memories are porous, motives are mixed, and the story you tell about yourself has a market value. The film keeps returning to how narratives are constructed, who records them, who amplifies them, who profits, and it makes the mechanics of storytelling itself feel sinister. A viral clip isn't just evidence, it's an event that rewrites possibility. Connected to that is a fascination with spectacle and punishment. Public accountability in Sinners often looks dangerously like entertainment, and the movie interrogates whether the desire to see someone fall is a form of moral clarity or a kind of crowd-sourced cruelty. Linked to spectacle is the theme of complicity. The film insists that sin is rarely heroic or demonic but usually domestic and logistical. Small compromises, protected secrets, the decisions people make to keep food on the table or to preserve a reputation. By showing everyday moral calculus, Lila's pragmatic betrayals, Jonah's staggered confessions, Maya's newsroom choices, the story suggests that culpability is distributed, not concentrated, and that systems, career ladders, religious institutions, media economies, shape what options people perceive as available. Memory and the instability of recollection become another recurring idea. Nonlinearity and repeated scenes demonstrate how memory is malleable, how it's edited both by grief and by convenience, and how the truth we recover is always a reconstruction, not a pristine object. Religion in the film is used as both comfort and cage. Rituals, hymns, and confessions surface as motifs that can soothe conscience while simultaneously providing architecture for shame. The movie doesn't demonize faith but examines how institutions can ask for preservation of image over genuine repair. Technology and social media are treated like characters in their own right. Machines that accelerate rumor, flatten nuance, and convert private pain into public commodity. And the film's sound and editing choices emphasize how mediated narratives jump scales, changing the stakes for ordinary people in an instant. Forgiveness and redemption are complicated here. Confession does not guarantee absolution, and public contrition can be performative, which raises uneasy questions about whether our systems even know how to receive repentance without turning it into spectacle. Power dynamics thread through every scene. Who gets believed, who gets protected, who gets silenced. And the film shows that authority isn't just about explicit coercion but about the quieter leverage of reputation, economic dependency, and institutional cover. Alongside structural themes there's a humanist insistence. The movie cares about small, embarrassing truths, the looks people exchange, the half-formed lies, the protective omissions, and argues that these quotidian things are the most revealing, because they are how people survive. The film also plays with moral ambiguity as a thematic device. It refuses to classify characters as purely villainous or saintly, and that refusal forces the audience into an uncomfortable ethical labor, to decide where sympathy ends and enabling begins. That labor is made deliberate by recurring visual and sonic motifs. Mirrors, stalled clocks, the hymn that returns in different harmonies, which the film uses to suggest that themes are less propositions to be asserted and more feelings to be inhabited. Importantly, Sinners in 2025 is interested in consequence rather than punishment. It asks what happens after the headline, when lives must be rebuilt or quietly dismantled, and in doing so it foregrounds the collateral damage of moral reckoning. There's also an implicit commentary on storytelling itself. The film shows how stories are economies. They confer status, cast blame, and sometimes function as survival strategies. And it toys with the irony that a community's self-conception can be both its moral compass and its method of evasion. Finally, the movie lingers on the idea that justice and mercy are not opposites but awkward partners. Scenes that pit accountability against compassion suggest that a system built solely on exposure will create new harms, while one built only on forgiveness risks erasing accountability. The result is a tangle of provocative questions rather than neat answers. Who gets to narrate shame? How do institutions shape available choices? Can confession be authentic under public pressure? And what does collective guilt demand of us beyond spectacle? Those questions don't resolve into a sermon. They stay with you, uneasy and generative, which is precisely the film's intention, to make you feel implicated in the very dilemmas it dramatizes. Visual effects and CGI in Sinners in 2025 mostly behave like a stealthy craftsman, invisible when they need to be and texturally loud when the story asks for it, and that choice is what defines their success or failure. When the VFX team treats shots as photographic problems to be solved, matching lens distortion, grain structure, motion blur, and color temperature between plate and element, the digital work vanishes into the scene and simply extends the film's realism. Think invisible jobs. Wire removal, digital set repairs, cleanup of extraneous reflections, subtle plate-based set extensions that make an alleyway feel larger, or crowd replication in the town hall sequences where a few extra doubles multiplied with careful motion blur cell scale without drawing attention. Those invisible fixes are complemented by deliberate, stylistic CGI choices. Glitched Compressed treatments for found footage inserts, frame-accurate digital artifacts layered over footage to make a viral clip. Feel like evidence rather than an effect, and those stylistic effects are most effective when the compositor intentionally mismatches fidelity, low-res codec, chroma subsampling, crushed blacks, so the audience accepts the artifice as part of the narrative grammar. The line where VFX distracts is familiar. When lighting doesn't match, a CG extension lit like studio daylight against a tungsten practical, skin rendering betrays a softness or subsurface scattering that reads digital, or shadows and reflections aren't anchored to the same light sources as the live action, poor edge blending on keyed elements, jittery match moving, or incorrect motion blur immediately yank you out of sympathy. Small errors, like a floating shadow or a reflection that ignores a street lamp, matter more here than flashy spectacle because the film's power is in intimacy, and anything that breaks that tactile sense of place becomes loud. Practical effects are treated as the film's tactile currency. Prosthetics, makeup, real rain, breakaway glass, and handheld practical lights give actors something to touch and react to, and those interactions photograph in a way CGI rarely replicates. When a scene requires a hand covered in mud or a subtle blood smear, practical application plus careful camera work wins every time because it carries micro-reflections, cloth deformation, and the unpredictable imperfections that register emotionally. Digital tools then amplify what practicals start: cleanup, extension, micro-corrections, and, when needed, larger manipulations. Seamless face touches removed, a city skyline stretched via matte paint-based projections, or digital doubles used only in wide crowd plates where performance fidelity isn't essential. On the technical side, the strongest moments come from rigorous plate photography and on-set reference capture, HDRI spheres or practicals for reflection matching, accurate lens reports for distortion correction, so the compositor has real-world data to integrate CG elements. 3D tracking, careful rotoscoping, multi-layer volume compositing for smoke and atmosphere, and hand-tuned color matching are the invisible chores that make a simple effect read as reality. The film also uses VFX narratively. Memory distortion sequences employ layered compositing, frame rate shifts, and microvoxel noise to make a past scene feel unreliable. Social media evidence is purposefully graded to look like multiple generations of re-encoding, which is a smart creative use of bad visual quality as storytelling. Sound design partners with the visuals. A digital wipe or a subtle morph feels convincing when the mix adds an almost subliminal crackle, compression thump, or transient click synced to the visual edit. Execution-wise, the best VFX are conservative, small, well-photographed interventions that respect actor performance and lighting, with digital artistry reserved for moments that warrant stylistic signal. Where the VFX overreaches, obvious CG faces, shiny, plasticky textures on body doubles, or cheap particle sims with no real-world interaction, the drama flattens because the audience is pulled into the mechanics of the trick rather than the consequences of the scene. Put simply, Sinners in 2025 benefits most when practical and digital craft play to their strengths. Practical for touch and immediacy, digital for scale, invisibility, and controlled stylistic effects. When those two disciplines marry via precise compositing, matched lighting, and thoughtful editorial placement, the visual effects enhance immersion and storytelling rather than competing with them. Set design and locations in Sinners in 2025 work like quiet storytellers that never interrupt the dialogue. They fill the frame with lived-in detail, history, and moral texture so that every room already has an opinion about the people inside it before anyone speaks. From the cramped paper-stacked newsroom where Maya chases scoops, walls plastered with pinboard clippings, coffee rings blooming across editorial notes, fluorescent bulbs that hum like a nervous ticker, to Jonah's church, a space that is both sanctuary and stage with scuffed pews, a fraying hymnbook on the lectern, and a pulpit that has worn the shape of the pastor's hands over decades. Each set is designed to reflect psychic weight as much as physical reality. The archivist Elias lives in a production design dream of dust and cardboard, shelves of labeled boxes, archival tape, half-burned candles, and a desk lamp that throws tiny altarpieces of shadow. Those props aren't decoration, they're evidence that tells you who he is and why he hoards memory. Public locations, the town hall, the courthouse, the square beneath the church spire, are chosen and dressed so architecture becomes commentary. A podium framed by symmetry to imply authority, a courthouse built of cold stone that dwarfs private grief, and a shuttered factory whose rusted sign and graffiti-studded yard visually summarize a town's economic and moral wear. Small props are treated like narrative anchors, a recorder's blinking red light, a battered VHS, a receipt with a smeared timestamp, a thumb hovering over a send button. The production team photographs these inserts with the same care as faces, so objects feel like characters. There's a clever contrast between private and public spaces, Kitchens and bedrooms are warm, slightly out of focus, cluttered with personal artifacts that invite empathy, while press rooms and campaign offices are antiseptic, color-coded, and full of flat surfaces that encourage performance, and that contrast visually reinforces themes of image versus interior life. Location work is a smart mix of on-site shoots that give documentary grit authenticity, the real grain of cracked sidewalks, the unpredictable light under real street lamps, and carefully constructed interiors that let the camera dance without breaking continuity. Set designers add tiny production touches: mismatched curtains, a child's drawing pinned behind official memos, a hymn marked with marginalia, so the eye keeps finding new information with each revisit. The production design team also uses color and texture economically, wood that has been rubbed smooth with years of use in the pastor's office, the cheap laminate of a campaign desk, the flaking paint of the town sign. Those tactile surfaces read on camera and make CG extensions and VFX work feel grounded because the actors are interacting with physical reality. Blocking and camera movement are clearly considered in the layouts: narrow hallways for claustrophobic confrontations, a long diner counter for confessional beats, wide civic spaces for spectacle, which lets directors stage both intimate micro-moments and public showdowns without awkward camera gymnastics. Crowd scenes benefit from intelligent dressing. Costumes, handheld signs, and layered background action create believable civic energy, while careful placement of extras ensures reactions feel organic rather than manufactured. Even sound echoes the production design choices: doors that creak on old hinges, the metallic ring of a church bell, the clack of newsprint, making locations feel like acoustic environments as well as visual ones. Budgetary inventiveness shows up in clever repurposing of props and sets, the same room dressed differently for various functions, selective use of practical rain and fog for texture rather than overused CG, which keeps the world coherent and rich without ostentation. The cumulative effect is a set of places that not only look authentic but also amplify character choices and themes. Architecture that judges, kitchens that conceal, offices that insist on public performance, and alleys that hide inconvenient truths. In short, the film's production design doesn't shout. It whispers facts and backstories into the camera, and those whispered details are what make the story feel inhabited, immediate, and oddly inevitable. Dialogue and script in Sinners in 2025 work like a set of hidden gears. You only notice how smoothly the machine runs when the actors stop and listen to each other, and the writing gives them that space. It's a script that trusts compression over explanation, favoring clipped, idiomatic exchanges in public scenes, fast newsroom banter, polished campaign talking points, glib TV interview answers, and softer, halting language in private moments where the real work is done: a deleted sentence, an interrupted apology, a voicemail left half-finished carry as much information as any long speech. The film excels at voice differentiation. Maya's lines are economical and slightly jagged, full of newsroom jargon and shorthand that signal her instincts and the cost of chasing headlines. Jonah's dialogue borrows cadences from scripture and confession, sentences that start as pastoral warmth and finish with an edge of self-rebuke. Lila speaks in tidy, strategic clauses that can be weaponized as easily as they comfort. And Elias slips archival asides into conversation that read like footnotes to other people's lives. Subtext is where the writing sings. The script rarely states motives outright. Instead it plants small conversational detonators, a joke that dies mid-laugh, a question asked and left unanswered, a compliment that smells like calculus, that reveal character by omission. The writers use interruptions, overlaps, and silence as punctuation. Conversations will lurch forward when someone cuts in, or a camera will hold on a beat of silence after a line so that the absence of reply becomes a louder statement than any reply could be. Structurally, the screenplay integrates modern modes of speech, texts, social media snippets, recorded audio, as legitimate lines of dialogue, and these fragments are staged not as gimmicks but as active participants in the drama. A forwarded message functions as accusation, a thread unravels a reputation, a clipped video rewrites a memory. There are moments of sharp wit, acidic editorial retorts, a politician's cancelable phrase twisted by a vengeful feed, and quieter, more devastating moments of emotional weight, where a single, simple line, "I was there, I kept it, I'm sorry," detonates because the script has earned it through previous accumulation. The script is also rhythmic. Some scenes feel almost theatrical in their three-beat construction: setup, moral counter, ironic payoff, while others rely on naturalism and allow dialogue to nod into silence. This variety keeps tone nimble and prevents the film from settling into a single rhetorical register. A couple of scenes lean toward expository convenience, an information-heavy conversation that exists mostly to align the audience, but more often than not the writers choose implication over explanation, trusting viewers to assemble motives from texture. Recurring verbal motifs work like musical leitmotifs. A phrase repeated in different contexts reframes itself. Comfort becomes accusation, memory becomes proof, which ties dialogue to the film's larger themes about narrative and culpability. Supporting cast lines are particularly well calibrated. Background characters get one or two perfectly drawn beats that turn them from scenery into lived presence, and those small verbal choices ripple through the main arcs. Overall, the script privileges the unsaid and the nearly said, using cuts, breath, and the architecture of modern communication to make speech feel like action rather than exposition, so that every line either advances plot, deepens character, or, most satisfyingly, complicates whatever moral stance you thought you had. Sinners in 2025 plays with genre like an expert card sharp. It deals you a familiar hand, small-town scandal, procedural beats, courtroom spectacle, and a mystery's slow unspooling, but then quietly cheats the expectations in ways that make the film feel both recognizable and oddly original. On the surface, it wears the coat of a social thriller, viral evidence, public outrage, the machinery of media and law, but underneath it's more of a moral chamber piece that borrows techniques from mystery, neo-noir, and institutional drama to reframe what those genres usually promise. Rather than leaning on chase sequences or set-piece revelations, the film builds suspense through perspective shifts, withholding, and the slow erosion of certainty. The thrill is psychological and communal, watching a town reconfigure itself, rather than purely kinetic. Conventions are used deliberately. The town hall outrage, the press briefing, the courtroom montage are all present, but they function less as genre payoffs and more as stagecraft for commentary. Spectacle becomes subject. Where the film subverts expectations most effectively is in its refusal of tidy resolution. There's no single detective figure who restores order, no villain who receives cartoonish comeuppance, and redemption, when it appears, is messy and partial. That choice flips the usual crime thriller arc into something more inquisitive about culpability across systems. Stylistically, the film borrows noir's moral chiaroscuro, shadowed interiors, ambiguous protagonists, but instead of glamorizing transgression, it uses that palette to highlight corrosion. Media glare versus private lamplight becomes a visual shorthand for public performance versus interior truth. The use of found footage, social media inserts, and degraded clips as narrative devices is a fresh twist on the evidence trope. Rather than treating a viral clip as the final key, the movie treats it as a living object that mutates meaning through replays and context, which smartly updates genre mechanics for the internet age. Humor is scarce and dry. Newsroom barbs and awkward small talk provide the film's only comic punctuation, so the balance lands as darkly human rather than ironically snappy. Moments of levity humanize characters without derailing the tonal gravity. The film also plays with procedural expectations. Investigative beats are present, but they're often interrupted by small domestic scenes or confessional asides that recenter stakes around relationships and survival, which shifts the balance from detective logic to moral consequence. A few genre clichés remain. There are recognizable tropes like the whistleblower's dilemma, staged public reckonings, and a dramatic courtroom interruption, but the film repurposes them as commentary on spectacle and punishment, using cliché as a lens rather than a payoff. Pacing-wise, this hybrid approach sometimes creates friction. Scenes that feel like exposition-heavy procedural work can slow the momentum for viewers expecting relentless suspense, while the quieter, character-led passages demand patience. Yet that impatience is also the film's point, forcing the audience to sit with moral ambiguity rather than be comforted by plot closure. Visually and sonically, the genre mashup is reinforced. The score borrows from sacred hymnody and low, uneasy motifs. Camera work shifts between intimate close-ups and architectural wide shots, so the film never reads as a single genre exercise but as a curated collision of forms that reflect its themes. Ultimately, the movie's most interesting genre move is its insistence that crime here is less an act to solve than a condition to inhabit. It turns thriller mechanics into tools for ethical inquiry, and in doing so it gives familiar genre elements new leverage rather than allowing them to deliver predictable catharsis. Sinners in 2025 reads less like a story set in a small town and more like a microcosm of contemporary society, using its narrative as a lens to examine the pressures, hypocrisies, and moral tightropes that define modern life. The film doesn't hit viewers over the head with commentary. Instead, social and cultural critique emerges organically from character choices, conflicts, and the tools they interact with: newsrooms, social media feeds, legal institutions, and religious spaces all double as both setting and critique. One of the clearest threads is the exploration of public spectacle versus private truth. How social media accelerates rumor, amplifies outrage, and blurs the line between accountability and performative justice. Clips that circulate online aren't just plot devices. They're a commentary on how information spreads, how reputations are weaponized, and how ordinary citizens become both jury and spectacle in the court of public opinion. The film also investigates institutional power and its subtle coercions. The courthouse, the church, the campaign office, all operate on rules that may appear neutral but exert moral and social pressure, shaping who gets heard, who gets silenced, and who survives a scandal. These environments highlight class, influence, and bureaucratic inertia, showing how people navigate ethical compromises in systems that aren't designed to serve fairness but appearance. Gender and role dynamics are threaded naturally. Maya's newsroom experience, Lila's strategic maneuvering, and Jonah's conflicted authority all illustrate how societal expectations intersect with personal agency, without feeling like lecture. Their struggles reflect real-world pressures around visibility, credibility, and ethical labor. Memory and historical perception are also central. The story probes how communities curate their own histories, deciding what to remember, amplify, or forget, and how these choices become social commentary on accountability, storytelling, and cultural values. The treatment of technology and virality is particularly sharp. Smartphones, viral videos, and online discourse are integrated into both plot and theme, illustrating how contemporary culture has outsourced moral arbitration to feeds, notifications, and ephemeral clips, while also probing the consequences of that delegation for individuals and communities. Religion is handled with layered nuance. Rituals, hymns, and church authority are neither demonized nor sanctified outright. Instead, they reveal the tension between tradition and human imperfection, suggesting how culture both comforts and constrains. Socioeconomic commentary appears in background details as well. The worn facades of buildings, decayed infrastructure, and reused props convey the town's material limitations, grounding ethical dilemmas in a realistic social context rather than abstract moralism. The film also explores how media shapes perception. Editorial choices, headline framing, and selective footage show the power structures behind cultural narratives, prompting viewers to question the information they consume and the biases they inherit. Even humor and irony are leveraged as tools of critique. Sharp, understated lines punctuate tension and illuminate the absurdities of societal rituals, bureaucratic formalities, and moral posturing, giving commentary texture without resorting to didacticism. Conflicts between characters are rarely just personal. They are reflections of broader societal tensions: trust versus suspicion, private conscience versus public expectation, survival versus principle, which makes the story resonate beyond the town and feel emblematic of contemporary cultural dynamics. In sum, Sinners in 2025 embeds social and cultural commentary in the mechanics of its plot, the design of its world, and the choices of its characters, creating a layered, thoughtful exploration of contemporary ethics, technology, and institutions without ever halting the narrative to lecture or summarize, letting the audience inhabit the commentary rather than merely observe it. Sinners in 2025 engages its audience in ways that feel almost conspiratorial. The film seems to pull viewers into the moral machinery of its world so that every decision, hesitation, and revelation lands not just on the screen but inside the mind. Emotional resonance is achieved less through melodrama and more through calibrated intimacy, a lingering close-up on Jonah's hesitation, a barely audible confession from Maya, or a private glance exchanged between secondary characters. These micro-moments accumulate into a rich emotional tapestry that rewards attention and empathy. Laughter is rare but sharply placed, often arising from awkward tension, ironic timing, or small human absurdities in the newsroom or town hall settings. These moments break tension in a naturalistic way while reinforcing character authenticity. Shock and suspense are threaded carefully. Rather than relying on jump scares or overblown plot twists, the film creates jolts through context and revelation. A viral clip shown in one context suddenly reappears elsewhere, a subtle line of dialogue reframes a scene, or a delayed reaction lets consequences land fully on the audience. Sadness and discomfort are similarly earned. Ethical compromise, small betrayals, and the ripple effects of public judgment are depicted with a fidelity that asks viewers to inhabit the moral gray zone. The emotional beats feel lived in, because the camera, editing, and performance never give you easy outs. The narrative structure itself invites engagement. Non-linearity, repeated scenes, and alternative perspectives encourage the audience to assemble the story actively, piecing together information like evidence rather than passively absorbing it. This active involvement fosters repeat viewings. As the more you watch, the more details, micro-expressions, and narrative cues reveal themselves, allowing previously unnoticed layers of character motivation and plot to emerge. The film also sparks discussion because it refuses moral closure. Who is right, who is complicit, and what should have happened next are questions the story deliberately leaves open, prompting conversation and debate long after the credits roll. Interactivity extends beyond moral reasoning. The visual motifs, recurring sound cues, and edited, found footage elements provide hidden Easter eggs and associative links that reward attentive audiences, creating a sense of shared detective work. Even pacing and rhythm are structured to manipulate engagement subtly. Slower, intimate beats allow for reflection and empathy, while rapid montages and social media inserts simulate the frenetic energy of public scandal, keeping viewers on edge and emotionally keyed to the narrative shifts. Characters' moral ambiguity is a key tool for engagement. No one is purely heroic or villainous, which forces audiences to interrogate their own sympathies and biases as the story unfolds. Finally, the film's careful attention to the interplay between personal stakes and communal dynamics ensures that engagement operates on multiple levels: intimate, ethical, and social, so that viewers feel both connected to individual characters and implicated in the broader moral landscape, making the experience immersive, thought-provoking, and emotionally persistent. Sinners in 2025 distinguishes itself from other contemporary social thrillers and moral dramas through its meticulous layering of character, narrative, and stylistic experimentation. Compared to traditional procedural thrillers, where the tension is primarily driven by a detective's chase or an explicit villain's machinations, Sinners leans into communal and systemic dynamics. The focus is on how a town, its institutions, and its individuals respond to scandal, rather than on a single hero solving a puzzle. In this sense, it shares DNA with films like Spotlight or The Post in its newsroom tension, but it diverges by blending non-linear storytelling, intimate character micro-moments, and stylized social media inserts, giving it a contemporary, almost post-digital edge that feels more immersive and psychologically intricate. Where genre peers often rely on conventional payoffs, courtroom victories, villain exposure, cathartic confessions, Sinners introduces ambiguity, moral complexity, and narrative loops that resist resolution, which positions it closer to films that probe ethical dilemmas over action, such as A Most Wanted Man or Nightcrawler, but with a uniquely serialized feel in its use of viral content and public spectacle. Within the director's own filmography, Sinners represents both a continuation and an evolution. If previous works focused on procedural clarity or character-driven drama, this film experiments with visual and auditory layering, integrating score, sound design, and VFX as narrative instruments rather than merely decorative tools, which demonstrates a more sophisticated and self-reflexive approach to storytelling. The pacing and rhythm are also distinct. Unlike similar ensemble thrillers that juggle multiple perspectives through straightforward linear edits, Sinners plays with overlapping timelines, reframed perspectives, and repeated sequences to heighten moral and emotional tension, which makes the narrative experience more participatory and reflective. Stylistically, the visual approach, muted yet textured color palettes, strategic depth of field choices, and a mix of practical and digital environments, differentiates it from standard social thrillers, giving it a tactile realism while also allowing for subtle stylistic flourishes that underscore psychological and thematic concerns. Character development is comparatively deeper than in many genre peers. Secondary characters are not window dressing but active ethical agents whose minor decisions ripple into the central narrative, reinforcing the sense that every individual contributes to the moral ecosystem. In terms of audience experience, Sinners in 2025 asks more of viewers than conventional thrillers. Repeat viewings, ethical reflection, and attention to visual and auditory cues are rewarded, which contrasts with films that prioritize surface-level suspense or plot twists. While certain genre conventions, viral scandals, investigative beats, courtroom confrontations, remain recognizable, the film reframes them, emphasizing consequence, ambiguity, and social reflection over spectacle or tidy resolution. In sum, Sinners in 2025 occupies a space between traditional moral drama, investigative thriller, and psychological character study, borrowing elements from each but recombining them into a narrative that feels familiar enough to orient the audience while innovative enough to challenge expectations, creating a viewing experience that is both intellectually and emotionally engaging. Symbolism and metaphor in Sinners in 2025 operate like a quiet undercurrent, weaving through the story in ways that enrich character, theme, and narrative without ever feeling forced. One of the most consistent motifs is the use of mirrors, reflective surfaces, and glass. Characters are often seen through windows, half reflected in mirrors, or caught in distorted surfaces, which visually reinforces the film's preoccupation with perception, memory, and moral ambiguity. These reflective moments invite the audience to consider not just what is being shown but how it is interpreted, signaling that truth in this world is always mediated. Light and shadow function metaphorically as well. Interior scenes often feature shafts of light cutting through darkness, highlighting moral complexity, inner conflict, or revelation. Conversely, shadowed corners, dim hallways, and obscured faces suggest concealment, secrets, or the ethical compromises characters make when no one is watching. Repetition is another key device. The recurring appearance of specific objects, a frayed hymn book, a spinning clock, a battered recorder, a half-empty cup, becomes symbolic of continuity, memory, and the weight of personal and collective history. The use of media, particularly viral video clips, functions metaphorically as well. The distortion, compression, and repetition of these clips mirror the way truth is mediated, interpreted, and reshaped by culture, suggesting that digital artifacts are as influential on perception as human testimony. Colors also carry symbolic weight. Muted earth tones often dominate private, introspective spaces, creating a feeling of grounded reality and human vulnerability, whereas brighter, harsher tones appear in public or institutional spaces, signaling exposure, judgment, or performative morality. Architectural elements are employed metaphorically too. Narrow hallways, looming staircases, and framing devices like doorways or archways frequently suggest ethical thresholds, moments of choice, or the transition from private conscience to public accountability. Sound motifs double as symbolic markers. The subtle ringing of a distant bell, the echo of footsteps in a corridor, or the ambient hum of machinery often punctuates pivotal moral decisions, reinforcing thematic resonance through auditory cues. Even interpersonal dynamics carry symbolic heft. Interactions across physical barriers, desks, railings, fences, underscore the moral, social, or emotional distance between characters, emphasizing how proximity does not equal understanding or ethical alignment. Finally, temporal motifs, such as repeated glimpses of clocks or fragmented timelines, underscore the malleability of memory and consequence, reinforcing the film's central questions about perception, culpability, and moral reconstruction. These layered symbols and metaphors enrich Sinners in 2025 by transforming objects, spaces, and even sound into carriers of thematic meaning, allowing viewers to engage with the narrative on multiple levels: intellectual, emotional, and ethical, and inviting deeper reflection long after the story unfolds. Sinners in 2025 doesn't exist in a franchise per se, but it situates itself within a broader cultural and cinematic context that gives it a kind of lineage, drawing from investigative thrillers, social dramas, and morally complex character studies of the past decade while also commenting on contemporary digital and institutional life. Its historical grounding is more psychological and social than literal. The film captures the zeitgeist of a post-digital, hyper-mediated society, portraying a world in which viral content, public outrage, and institutional scrutiny shape personal lives as decisively as traditional legal or moral structures. The accuracy lies in its detailed observation of institutional operations, social media dynamics, and civic ritual. Newsrooms feel lived in and meticulously accurate, the courthouse procedures are credible without feeling artificially procedural, and the town's social fabric, from community gatherings to local politics, is depicted with an anthropological attention to gesture, hierarchy, and everyday tension. The filmmakers immerse the audience in this world through production design, dialogue, and performance. Props, clothing, signage, and small environmental details signal time, place, and social norms, making the universe feel specific and coherent without relying on historical exposition. The film also situates itself within a cinematic lineage by nodding to predecessors in social investigation and ethical inquiry, from the Post to Spotlight, and even elements reminiscent of neo-noir moral tension, yet it updates these ideas by incorporating modern digital culture, virality, and multi-perspective narrative, showing how the stakes of public perception have evolved. Characters' interactions with media and institutional authority are informed by contemporary practices, lending authenticity and immediacy. The handling of social feeds, viral clips, and public statements mirrors real-world behaviors, making the fictional world feel plausible and the ethical questions urgent. Moreover, by documenting the interplay between memory, perception, and accountability, the film effectively chronicles a kind of social history of its fictional community, capturing the ebb and flow of rumor, the transformation of reputations, and the way collective judgment unfolds in a connected world. The attention to temporal and cultural detail, from the style of technology and communication to the subtle cues in architecture and environment, creates a sense of lived reality, anchoring the narrative in a recognizable socio-historical moment even as the story itself is fictional. In essence, Sinners in 2025 functions as both a contemporary morality play and a document of modern institutional and social dynamics, placing it within a historical context of films that interrogate truth, consequence, and society, while updating that tradition with the nuances, tensions, and immediacy of the digital age. Sinners in 2025 has emerged as a standout example of how a film can defy industry expectations and achieve financial success through a combination of strategic marketing, strong word of mouth, and a resonant cultural narrative. Despite initial skepticism regarding its profitability, the film has demonstrated impressive box office performance, grossing over $365 million globally, surpassing its estimated $90 million production budget and $50-60 million marketing spend. This success is particularly notable in an era where original horror films often face challenges in recouping their budgets. The film's financial trajectory was bolstered by its strong opening weekend, where it grossed $48 million, outperforming projections and securing the top spot at the box office. This was followed by a remarkable second weekend, with a 4.9% drop in earnings, marking it as one of the best second weekend performances for an R-rated horror film. Such sustained box office performance is rare and underscores the film's broad appeal and effective marketing strategy. Marketing played a crucial role in the film's success. The promotional campaign leveraged social media platforms to generate buzz, with targeted content that resonated with diverse audiences. The film's themes and characters sparked discussions across various demographics, contributing to its widespread popularity. Additionally, the strategic release of the film in premium formats like IMAX attracted a significant number of viewers, enhancing its box office returns. Critically, Sinners has been met with acclaim, holding a 98% rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an A CinemaScore, indicating strong audience satisfaction. This positive reception has not only sustained its box office momentum but also positioned it as a contender in various award circuits, further solidifying its status as a financial and critical success. In summary, Sinners in 2025 exemplifies how a well-crafted film, supported by effective marketing and a compelling narrative, can achieve significant box office success. Its performance challenges the notion that original horror films are inherently risky investments, offering a blueprint for future productions aiming to balance artistic integrity with commercial viability. Sinners in 2025 is available through various platforms, offering viewers multiple options to experience this acclaimed film. As of July 4, 2025, the film is available for streaming on HBO Max, offering both standard and Black American Sign Language (BASL) versions. You can also rent the film on Amazon Prime Video for $9.99 or purchase it for $19.99, with rentals including 30 days to start watching and 48 hours to finish once started. Apple TV offers the film for rent or purchase, with prices similar to Amazon Prime Video. Fandango at Home provides another option for digital rental or purchase. For those who prefer physical media, the Blu-ray and DVD editions released on July 8, 2025, include extensive behind-the-scenes content, offering fans additional insights into the film's production. For the most immersive experience, watching Sinners in 2025 on HBO Max is recommended, especially for those interested in the innovative BASL version. However, if you prefer owning a physical copy or wish to enjoy bonus content, the Blu-ray/DVD editions are a great choice. Digital rentals or purchases on platforms like Amazon Prime Video or Apple TV are convenient options for immediate viewing. If you enjoyed this video and would like us to provide reviews of every kind of movie, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.
Goodbye.